Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group, this time with our roundtable community outreach with the NADCP, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. October is Breast Cancer, Mental Health, National Disability, and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelley. You heard at the break. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have our panelists with us on the Zoom. We're going to be talking about some things. We're going to be talking about the Justice for Vets and how it works, and the value in vets mentoring vets, and how other key issues and how mentorship and also justice for veterans is so important. Now, Mark Panasiewicz, I'm going to mess up your last name, Panasiewicz. Panasiewicz, U.S. Air Force veteran and project director with Justice for Vets. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today? Can you hear me okay?
Hear you great. Loud and clear.
Great.
So let me know, what is the Justice for Vets about? First of all, tell us about the program, how it got started. Tell us, what is this program doing for veterans today?
Well, Justice for Vets.
Oops. We lost him.
It's like we froze up a little bit, so we got to get him back on the line. We got to get him back in about 10 seconds. So let me see.
I don't know.
Is Mark, Mark, you there? Can you hear us? Just give us a call back. So Mark is a U.S. Air Force veteran. He's also had a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Michigan Technical University. He has a Master's in Clinical Social Work from Michigan State University, and also was involved in the Kinawa Bay Indian Community Healing to Wellness Court, which is drug court, from 2011 to 2018. And he specialized in Tribal Law and Policy Institute since 2014. And he currently serves as a project director for the Justice for Vets, a division of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. So this is something we wanted to talk about because of the fact that a lot of veterans find themselves in situations where, unfortunately, with substance abuse or drug addiction, they find themselves in the court system. And what we found, the reason we're having this conversation is what we found, the data has shown over many years, is that you can spend less money and get better results by providing treatment versus providing punishment, just focusing on punishment, figuring out a way to help people learn from their mistakes and do better so they can be better citizens. Mark, you with us again?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm trying to get the Zoom connected back up, but I've got the audio back up. So while I'm trying to get my Zoom back up, I'll tell you what I was starting to say, which is basically the Justice for Vets is a division of NADCP, which is the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And what we do is we travel around and offer training opportunities to veterans treatment courts, and try to get them to follow the best practice and the evidence-based practices that have been established, and so that they can do the absolute best they can do for their vets.
So when you're going through drug treatment court, people have to have first of all, we need to understand that it's not an easy process. From what I understand, it's a lot. It's going to try you. A lot of people don't make it through. A lot of people rather go to jail sometimes than go through this program because they have a choice. Is it a choice that they can go either through the program, or is it more of an opportunity where they're offered the ability to go through the program?
It's always an opportunity. It's always a choice. Okay. They don't ever force somebody to go in there. It's not usually court ordered. It's a volunteer program. Oftentimes they will take the advantage because there's carrots to doing it. And one of the big carrots is a lot of times their record can be cleaned up or expunged, or their sentencing can be less. And so that's a big part of that. The overall result is, of course, giving them back their lives. And letting them be reintegrated back into society, and again, letting them have that honor and integrity that they had while they were serving, too.
So you work with the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community Healing to Wellness Court, which is drug court. How has that experience, can you relate that experience to what you've seen with veterans? Some of the struggles that Native Americans have, and a lot of communities are disenfranchised or are low to moderate income or just don't have the opportunities out there. How have you seen success in that arena versus how do you relate that to the Veterans Court?
Well, they're both the same model. The big difference is that the difference in the model is that is that one is, of course, working with Native American populations, and the other one is working with veteran populations. And so one of the things that the Healing and Wellness Court figured out quite a long time ago, and that would be that it takes a community to help somebody get through that kind of a process. And that's what we're doing with veterans. That's why the difference between a veterans treatment court and an adult drug court, say, is that we have mentors. And the mentors are kind of that secret component that helps the veterans get through the court by offering them in support and encouraging them and empowering them and all that. And 99% of the time, the veterans, the mentors are all voluntary.
So how do you pick or find mentors?
Well, the courts find them. We don't find them. What we do is we train them at Justice for Vets. We help train the mentors. And so a lot of times the courts reach out to their veteran populations. Sometimes they go through the VA. Sometimes they go through organizations like the Lions Club or those kind of places, or even veterans organizations. Team Red, White, and Blue is one where they can sometimes get mentors, or the VFW or the American Legion. All those are places that they can find people that want to volunteer and help out fellow veterans. And so that's how they usually find them. And what we do at Justice for Vets is we help train them so that the mentors have the understanding of boundaries and understand what role they're going to play and not to get out of their lane, so to speak. A lot of times when the veterans hear that they're going to be advocating for veterans, we want to make sure that they understand what that advocation means, and that's encouraging them and supporting them and that kind of stuff. That's what we want to make sure we see.
And who are these veterans or the mentors? I'm sorry. Are they normally people that maybe have been on that path themselves, or are they people that are just charitable and want to help out?
They're both. We've seen mentors that come through have actually graduated from veterans treatment courts and then turn around after they have a term of recovery to turn around and start volunteering. We also see mentors that have never had a substance use issue who volunteer and everything. Because one of the things they found when they look at the component there for veterans treatment court is that it's about the culture. And you said you were an Army vet, right, sir?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Well, I was Air Force. All right. So immediately when we say that, I can see in your face right now, you can think of all the jokes you can make about Air Force, right? How easy we had it, how light it was, right?
If I'd done it again, I would have joined the Air Force.
Exactly. And we all make fun of Marines, right?
Right.
And because that's part of military culture. The same way when we talk about MREs and boot camp and all those things that we can bring up that people that haven't served don't necessarily, they may have heard of them, but they might not necessarily understand them. Mm-hmm. Even something as saying embrace the suck, or an MOS. And so that's the importance of those mentors, is that they help people bridge that gap of culture and help non-veterans understand what they're doing when they're working with veterans. And the other thing is it gives that common bond for the veteran that's the participant in the program to know that there's somebody there, that there's somebody there that isn't associated with the court, because they're not a member of the court. The mentors are volunteer, and they're there really just to encourage and empower. And I think that's where we see the strength come up from it.
So do you see this expanding? Because I want to touch on this particular point. I mentioned this earlier, but I think the key thing why I'm excited about this idea is because of treatment courts. It's because the success rate is so much higher than the regular civilian population or the regular criminal justice system. When you have the recidivism rates that are so much lower, but it's a fraction of the cost of the regular criminal justice system. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, the studies show over and over and over again that the locking people up does not help them with their mental health issues, and it doesn't help them with their substance use.
Looks like we froze up a little bit again.
Yep, we lost him.
So you got to call us back a little bit, Mark. So we lost Mark a little bit for a second or so. So one of the things that there you are. There you're back. You're back with us. You froze up a little bit. So repeat what you just said because you froze up a little bit.
Okay, what I said is that of course they work, because when we look at studies, we can see that. We can see that recidivism is less, and that if throwing somebody in prison or jail worked, then we could just throw them in prison and they'd be cured, but that hasn't worked. We've seen that. It doesn't work. And so they keep having this revolving door. And so when we look at this, we can see that it absolutely does work. And that's why treatment courts are popular. That's why they're flourishing. And the other thing is with veterans treatment courts, we're definitely seeing a difference with the mentors, so much so that the adult treatment courts now are starting to do peer support mentors. because they see that culture is important and that bond and that encouragement and empowerment is really a big part of this.
So do you see this expanding? What is the growth rate of these treatment courts, and how can we do more to expand it? Or, in all honesty, I don't see why we don't do this all the time. This should be the model, from what I can see.
Well, that's absolutely right. It should be the model, and they are growing and they are expanding. If you look at the number of treatment courts, even from 5 years ago today, you'll see that they're expanding. A big part of it is just educating. I think that's a huge part of why treatment courts haven't caught on in some places, is because a lot of people get the wrong idea of what they are. They think that a treatment court is light on crime, or it's going to be some easy process, or somebody's being able to manipulate a system, and they don't realize the intensity that happens not only with the treatment that's involved, because remember, we're talking about a treatment court, but also about the supervision. One of the things I've always seen is you'll see people say things like, well, if somebody has a domestic violence, then they shouldn't be in treatment court. And the example I always use with that is this. Okay, if somebody has domestic violence and they go to jail, they might go to jail for 6 months, maybe. And that's if the victim doesn't press charges at all and gets them right back out anyways, because majority of the time that's exactly what happens. And so now we have somebody that does their 6 months in jail, gets out, still has their mental health issues, still has their substance use issues, and now they're unsupervised. Okay? To me, that doesn't make any community safer. Or we can put them into a highly intensive program that lasts 18 months. Okay? Usually a minimum of 18 months, and that's if they do it perfectly. Oftentimes, it's much longer than 18 months, and during that 18 months, they're reporting to court once a week, they're reporting to our probation officer once a week. Every time they step out of line, even a little bit, they're going to get sanctioned, and when they do something right, they're going to get incentivized. Plus, we're going to make sure that they're going to treatment weekly, we're making sure that they're going to groups. To me, that sounds like something that's going to make a community a heck of a lot safer than throwing somebody in jail for maybe 6 months and nothing changing. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we look at.
So what I'm hearing is accountability is what is a key focus on the program. Making sure everybody's accountable for what their actions. You give them, like you said, a carrot for, to give them a incentive to try to move forward. And then really, and we've talked about this in other segments in the past, but the person gets to a certain point where they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're sick and tired of being at rock bottom. And they're looking for a way to get off of rock bottom, but they just don't have the tools or mechanism around them or the support system around them to do it. And this kind of gives them
that's a great point you brought up, too. That's a great point, because that was the belief for a long time. The belief for a long time is that somebody has to hit absolutely rock bottom before anything can change. Now, if you think about it, what's the absolute rock bottom?
Like low job? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, death is dead.
No, death. Death is the absolute rock bottom.
You're under 6 feet under.
Okay, so how do... That's what I mean. So how do we help somebody recover from that point? I mean, so we're basically telling somebody, you may have to die before we can do anything. And so what they've actually found out now is instead of trying to push that rock bottom, that what we found out is it's not a rock bottom that makes the difference. It's absence of hope. When somebody gets hope that there might be something different and there's hope that something can happen, that's when we start seeing real change. And that's one of the things that treatment courts are learning now and teaching, is that recovery capital is much more important than rock bottoms. And the same thing with a veterans treatment court. I mean, a lot of times the reason why they're where they're at is they're hopeless. It's not because they need to hit more rock bottom. And that's one of those things when we look at the mentors. The mentors can come in and be that source of, hey, look, I haven't been where you're at, but I'm telling you there's hope. And if anything, I'm here to lend that hand to let you grab out to. And I think that's what makes that huge difference between the veterans treatment courts and other ones. But it's absolutely about finding hope now. Not so much let's hit rock bottom, or, there's another belief that they had to want it. That was the other thing. They have to want it.
Wow.
And that's, again, been proven kind of false. What they've shown is that somebody that is coerced or forced into treatment does just as well as somebody that goes voluntarily. There is no difference in the recovery numbers when we look at that.
Really? So a person who's forced into a treatment has the same success rate as someone who voluntarily goes in?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So if I'm your everyday, Joe on the street and I decide to go to treatment, my success rate is the exact same as somebody that had some pressure put on them by a court, and was given the option of go to jail for 8 months or go to treatment. That person will do as equally as well as me. The results are the exact same.
Wow.
And that's why they're saying more and more about it's more about a presence of hope than a rock bottom. And the same thing when we look at the justice the justice involved vets. That's what it comes down to. Is it really comes down to a mentoring process that helps them, and gives them that. And I'm not disregarding the rest of the court, because the whole court is what makes it work. But that one key component really does come down to those mentors.
So when a person goes into treatment court, they don't go to jail typically, right? They get to go back home pretty much. Now, are they under house arrest? Do they have an ankle bracelet? How does the monitoring work with
It all depends on how the courts do it, but the way they usually do it is they structure it with a phase program. And so with each phase, there's a little bit more supervision. So when you first start out in the program, there's going to be a lot more supervision. And then depending on the behaviors of the veteran or the participant is going to depend on whether or not supervision increases or decreases. So if when they first get out, they're doing everything good and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're following the rules of the program, then no, they're not going to do increased supervision. Now, if all of a sudden I'm breaking my curfew every night, that I'm supposed to be home at 10 o'clock, so the first time I break it, well, number one, it's going to get brought up in court, which is weekly. We're not talking monthly, we're talking weekly. All right? And so I get brought up in court, and then I get sanctioned. And maybe the judge is going to say, you know what, because you broke curfew, you're going to go pick up garbage on the side of the road for the next 2 hours. All right? And we're going to put an anklet bracelet on you so we can keep track of you. And then that might happen for, a couple weeks, and then they might say, okay, we're going to try this again. We'll take the bracelet off, and we'll see what you can do, and that's how that works. And then if they do really well and they meet their curfew, then there's usually some kind of reward. Oftentimes it's praise from the judge or things like that, or it might be a small incentive for doing the right thing. And that's exactly how the program works.
So
now, does jail happen? Jail can happen, but we don't recommend jail. The studies have shown that jail does not solve people. Matter of fact, a lot of times jail undoes treatment, and so when we're trying to work with somebody to, treat them and give them new tools, when we put them in jail, that actually can undo that.
Wow.
And so that's why the studies actually show that you shouldn't put somebody in jail for more than 5 days. Otherwise, after 7 days, you actually start trying to fix.
So
that's kind of like the last result.
So why is that? Well, I've heard of situations where for people that are not necessarily in have a substance abuse problem, or maybe they have an alcohol problem or a drug problem, or where they heard of non-addicted people going into prison and getting, it's like a college for criminals. That's what people would call it. So they learn from other criminals, because you're surrounded by other criminals that are doing all kinds of different things, sometimes even gang activity inside the prisons, where you learn how to be a better criminal. So you come out, not necessarily, and then you come out of the prison, and then you have this record now, so you can't really integrate back into society the same way as you did before. So the easiest path, like water flowing to the path of least resistance, the easiest path to getting what you want, to try to meet your needs and try to have some kind of success, is going back into the criminal element. So, but what is it with a person who has a substance abuse problem? Because you would think that the more time they're away from using the drugs, that maybe they might have a better shot of being sober. So
the misunderstanding here, and this is the problem that we see over and over again, is people keep forgetting that a substance use disease is just that, it's a disease. So it's not a choice. And so when we say, well, if we throw somebody in jail and they're away from a long enough period of time, then that should make choice different. But the problem is the neural pathways on the brain, and that's what really we're looking at. When we're looking at substance use disorder, we're looking at a neural pathway in the brain that actually biological thought. That's the basics of it, okay? And that's why when we see people that have substance use disorders doing things that are absolutely crazy, and we look at them and we either have to say, well, they're either crazy, or doing crazy behaviors, or they're just horrible people. Because a lot of times the stuff they're doing is harmful to other people. They're stealing from loved ones or neglecting children and all that stuff. So when we look at the fact that it's actually a fact that they have a difficulty making logical thought, that's what it comes down to. And they've got brain scans that show that people that have a substance use disorder, the frontal lobe of the brain just isn't firing right. And so when we treat them, what we're doing is just like somebody has a stroke. When somebody has a stroke and they lose the ability to speak, That's because the neural pathway that goes to the speech center has been damaged. And what we do is we send them to rehab and we send them to speech therapy, and we work on creating a new neural pathway so that they can access their speech again. Well, the same thing happens when we work with somebody who has substance use disorder. We're trying to create a new neural pathway so they can access logical thought again. That's what the whole point of it is. So if we just throw them in jail and we never do any physical treatment, it'd be like throwing somebody in jail that had a stroke, that couldn't talk. If we just stick them in jail, they're not going to be able to talk when they get out 2 years later. Wow. And so what we really want to do is do that neural pathway and create it. And here's the thing is when we stick somebody in jail and we've been working on that neural pathway, when we put them in jail, that's a really negative place, and everybody in there is going to encourage them to use the bad pathway, the one that got them in here in the first place, that illogical thought pathway. And so we're actually undoing the one we've already created, and that's why jail just doesn't work. And that's why we need to continue to treat.
So going back to
and I'm not saying, go ahead.
No, going back to what we talked about, what you mentioned earlier. So people are human, they make mistakes. They sometimes fall off the wagon. So what are the consequences for falling off the wagon? You mentioned increased surveillance or increased supervision, but is it because someone might be afraid that if given my history, given my past, I tried many times to get off of drugs and I just blew it up completely, wrecked my whole recovery process. What are the consequences for failing?
So the way it works when we look at treatment courts, all right, and veterans treatment courts and adult treatment courts, is we look at everything as proximal and distal goals, okay? And what we mean by that is if you look at me, I'm a little bit of a chubby guy, right? And if you said, hey, Mark, we want you to go run a marathon. Well, for me, that would be a very distal goal. That's not something I'm going to be able to do right away. And if you looked at me and said, Mark, if you don't run this marathon, we're going to punish you, more than likely I'm going to get punished, and that's not really fair, okay? But if you said, Mark, listen, we want you to walk half a mile today. Well, that's proximal. I should be able to do a half a mile. Now, if I choose not to do that, then, yeah, I should probably get some kind of sanction. When we look at people with substance use disorder, that's the same thing. When they're first coming in the program, expecting them to be sober right off the get-go is an unrealistic thing, okay? And so if they while they come into the program, yes, we are going to sanction them because we want to change behavior, but those sanctions are going to be very light, and we're going to be more treatment-focused, meaning that we recognize that you need more treatment so you have no new skills and new ability to make different decisions. So instead of punishing, we're going to look for more about treating. Let's treat you. Now, once they get to a point where they've established they have some recovery time in or some sober time and they can establish that they can do some time without using, that's when the punishment starts more about using. So once you've established that you can be sober and you've got some new tools, but you're still occasionally using the wrong ones, that's when the punishment will increase. So there's not a treatment court out there that's going to just throw the book at somebody the first time they come in and use. That's insanity. If these people could stop using, they wouldn't need a treatment court. You know what I mean? I was a clinical director of an inpatient treatment facility, and I've seen some facilities say we got to be drug free for 2 weeks before you can come into a treatment center. I mean, to me, that's insanity. If they can go drug free for 2 weeks, they probably don't need to be in the treatment center in the first place, or you're encouraging them to lie to you. That's what you're telling them. You're saying, listen, lie to us, and then come in. And again, that's giving the wrong message because we're trying to promote honesty and health, but we're telling somebody, if you want to get in here, you got to lie, And so that's why treatment courts aren't designed that way, Do
you think?
We're not saying we own substance use, but we are saying that we understand that you need help before you're going to get better.
Do you think that some of the mistakes that we've made, and particularly with treatment around drugs, because when you said that, it reminds me of the Nancy Reagan campaign back in the 80s with Just Say No. They had Nancy
Just Say No.
Went on national television and said, well, there's a horrible thing going around right now. It's called drugs. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Just say no.
Yeah.
This was that easy, but not recognizing and understanding a lot of the the pressures and the societal issues, economic issues, and all the things that go around with it that force people into making these types of habits and these decisions. And once one hit of heroin and you're hooked. That's it. That's all it takes. A lot of these drugs, these hardcore drugs, one hit is all it takes for you to be addicted for life. Your body will be chemically changed and altered where you will need that drug. Otherwise, you will get very, very sick. So
absolutely.
So what caused this? A lot of the bad ideas Was it just negligence, or is or maybe this bad philosophy from your perspective?
I think it's bad philosophy, and I think that. So I'll give you an example. Here's the example I always like to give. All right, let's say that your name is Sarah, and you have cancer, Sarah, and it's horrible. So horrible cancer you have, and you have 2 kids, but you haven't been able to work. You haven't really been able to take care of your kids because you're going through chemo treatments. It's just you are in really rough shape. You lost your jobs. You're having problems keeping your lights on and feeding your kids. Social services comes in and says, "Listen, Sarah, we got to take the kids. We got to remove them because you're in a position where you just can't do this right now. All right, but I promise you, when you get better and you beat the cancer, we're going to do everything we can to help you get your kids back." So it happens. Sarah's kids get removed. Sarah goes through her treatment, gets better. Sarah goes back to the worker, goes, "Hey, everything's good. I'm working again. All good." The worker says, "Let's go. We're going to get your kids back. We're going to work on it. Get your kids back. Everything's hunky-dory." Okay? That's a great story for Sarah because Sarah has cancer. Do we treat Sarah that way if she's a heroin addict?
Hell no.
No, we don't. We treat her like she's got choice, that she's doing these horrible things, and that she's just a horrible person. We don't treat her like it's a disease, and that's where the problem is that we're dealing with a disease. We're not dealing with a choice. That's why the just say no doesn't work so well, It's easy to say just say no when you're, in Bel Air in a mansion. It's hard to just say no when, you're in the hood and you're afraid to walk into school and, all sorts of other aspects that come up to that. Or you've been being abused for half your life. It's hard to say, just say no. And so I think when we can start changing our own mindset on it being a disease, because everybody will say, "Oh, it's a disease," but we don't treat people like it's a disease. We treat people like it's a choice and like they're doing something that's just horrible.
Wow. I think that's really profound what you mentioned. I think that's very true in our society. We have a society that likes to punish versus treat or correct problems. So we get caught up in this idea of punishment and not realizing, that it's an endless cycle. We never fixed a problem by just constantly focusing on punishment. If the person is not given an opportunity to do something different or to get out of their addiction, then you would expect the same result. So we have to do more to expand these courts. We have to get, like I said, this is the model. Once again, going back to the original premise at the top of the show, this is more effective and it costs less. I mean, that's a no-brainer. More effective, costs less. 10 times more effective, multiples of more effective. We're not talking like just 20% more or whatever. Multiples more effective and a fraction of the cost. I'm going to mess up your last name one more time. Mark Panasiewicz. How do you say? Panasiewicz. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you. Justice for Vets.
All right. Thank you, sir.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.